Okay, wait. Did you know Diane Lane was literally kidnapped by her own mom at 15? Yeah. And that's not even the wildest part of her story. She blew up young, dipped when Hollywood expected her to play nice, and stayed quiet while rumors followed her for years. But now, Diane Lane finally breaks her silence. And what she just admitted, you're not gonna believe it. Before she was the woman who nearly burned down the screen in Unfaithful, before the red carpets and Oscar buzz, Diane Lane was just a New Yorker, born in a tiny hospital room on January 22, 1965. Her mom, Colleen Farrington, was a nightclub singer who once posed as Playboy's Miss October 1957. And her dad, Burton Eugene Lane, was an acting coach in Manhattan who also drove a taxi to pay their bills. But like most kids, she didn't get to enjoy a happy childhood. Diane was barely 2 weeks old, just 13 days to be exact, when her mom decided parenting wasn't for her and left. From then on, Diane's childhood was, well, anything but normal. She didn't grow up in one house, or even in one neighborhood. Instead, she and her dad bounced around between various hotels and apartments all over Manhattan. There was no regular routine, no real sense of home. But there was one constant: acting. Since her father ran acting workshops, Diane practically grew up backstage at small theaters. She got her first stage role at just 6 years old. By the age of 12, she was already touring across Europe with an experimental theater group called La Mama. While other kids were worried about fitting in at middle school, Diane was traveling the world, rehearsing lines, and dealing with adults twice her age. But the major breakthrough in her career happened in 1979, which later reshaped Diane's life impeccably. At 13, everything exploded. Diane got her first major film role in A Little Romance, and not just opposite any actor, but the legendary Laurence Olivier himself.
Heidegger?
It's for school, an assignment.
They assign you Heidegger?
Sure.
They are teaching you existentialism.
Heidegger isn't really an existentialist.
Her performance was so impressive, so mature, that at just 14, Diane landed on the cover of Time magazine in August 1979, under the headline Hollywood's Whiz Kids. Overnight, she became Hollywood's newest obsession. But what people didn't know at the time was just how complicated things were behind the scenes. Hollywood painted Diane as this young genius, but no one considered that maybe she wasn't prepared to handle that kind of fame, especially without proper support. At 15 years old, just 1 year after her big breakthrough, Diane decided she'd had enough. She legally emancipated herself from her father, essentially saying, "I'll take it from here," and moved to Los Angeles. Not to a family member's house or even a guardian, nope. She moved in with her co-star Christopher Atkins, a teenage actor best known for The Blue Lagoon. This wasn't teenage rebellion, it was more like teenage survival. Diane later admitted this move was reckless, but also something she needed to do at the time. Then, just when she thought things couldn't get any more complicated, something more horrible happened. Diane's mother, who had been completely absent from her life since she was a baby, reappeared and kidnapped her. Yes, literally kidnapped her. At 15, Diane was whisked away from a hotel in Georgia where she was filming and taken across state lines by her own mother. Her father had to sue to get Diane back home. After 6 tense weeks in court, she finally returned to New York, shaken and hurt. Diane cut off communication with her mother for 3 full years after that. You'd think after such a dramatic childhood, things might calm down for Diane, but the drama kept coming, this time from Hollywood itself. Throughout her teenage years, Diane constantly found herself in the tabloids, being linked romantically to every male co-star she worked with. Matt Dillon, Michael Pere, Richard Gere, you name it. She had to publicly clarify, saying things like, "Just because I play someone's lover doesn't mean I'm actually in love with them." But nobody really listened. They saw the beautiful, talented actress and assumed the rumors had to be true. By the time Diane was 18, she was exhausted from constantly defending herself. The projects kept coming. Six Pack, Ladies and Gentlemen, the fabulous Stains, and then the back-to-back Coppola features like Rumble Fish and The Outsiders. She was orbiting Hollywood's elite: Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise, Nicolas Cage, all big names of the industry. But none of this fame felt real, at least for Diane. Diane, in a later interview, said, "I didn't know who I was supposed to be. Everyone had an idea of me, except me." She felt trapped, and then she made a brave decision nobody saw coming. Instead of going along with it, instead of spiraling into the usual Hollywood breakdown, Diane quietly started saying no. She stepped back from the spotlight, declined big interviews, and refused to play the game Hollywood wanted her to play. She went to Europe with no plan, no agent, no press. She just vanished. There was no social media back then, no real-time updates. If you were gone, you were gone. And for a few years, Diane Lane was gone. This break, this intentional erasure from the Hollywood machine, wasn't just a breather. It was a scream disguised as silence. And now, some of you might have thought, well, that's the end of a humongous career. But Diane simply said, not yet. What followed was a comeback like nothing Hollywood had ever seen. And when she finally returned years later, it wasn't as the teenage eye candy the world once knew. She came back as a woman who had lived through lifetimes, carrying every scar, every lesson, every silent triumph. This time, she was ready to show Hollywood exactly what she was made for. When Diane Lane returned from Europe, Hollywood didn't roll out the red carpet. She was barely in her 20s, but already considered difficult. Not in the diva sense, just uncooperative. She didn't play the game. She didn't want to be typecast as the young naive or the girl next door. She had grown up, and the industry didn't quite know what to do with that. She came back in 1987 with Lady Beware and The Big Town, both low-profile projects. Critics were polite, but the public barely noticed. It wasn't a groundbreaking comeback at all, and it didn't help that the roles weren't great. One script after another, she found herself reading parts that were flat, underwritten, or just plain insulting. In her early 20s, Diane was stuck in this weird Hollywood limbo. Too old to play a teenager, too young for the adult complexity she craved. The problem wasn't her talent, it was that no one knew how to write for her. Or rather, no one bothered to. And it showed. She landed roles in films like Vital Signs, Priceless Beauty, and Chaplin, movies that either flopped or buried her behind male leads. Meanwhile, actresses with less experience were being fast-tracked, given franchises, awards, attention. But Diane was paying for stepping away. Hollywood doesn't forget, and it definitely doesn't forgive either. She later expressed how frustrating it was to be offered scripts that were all about being the pretty wife or the worried girlfriend. Nothing like what she knew she could do. And then came The Cotton Club. It was supposed to be huge. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Set in the 1930s, it was a periodic piece with big studio buzz. Diane was cast as the female lead, and it should have been her comeback moment. But fate had other plans. The movie was a box office disaster. Critics trashed it, and the press fixated more on the film's senseless production than the performances. Diane once again got lost in the shuffle. By the end of the 80s, the narrative around her had shifted. She was no longer Hollywood's rising star. She was the actress who didn't quite live up to her potential. Which is wild, because her talent had never been the issue. It was the system. So what did she do? She didn't beg. She didn't chase relevancy. She just waited. She kept working on smaller films, indie projects, and television series. And slowly, something shifted. In 1989, she starred in Lonesome Dove, a television miniseries that became a surprise hit.
I thought you'd want to stay clear of such doings for a while. See, that's natural. So you best take your time. You best take your time.
It doesn't matter how much time.
Critics praised her, audiences connected, and just like that, people started remembering. Oh right, Diane Lane is really, really good. But even then, the real breakthrough was still years away. Through the early 90s, she stayed consistent. My New Gun, Indian Summer, Jack, none of them were flashy or award-worthy, but she was working and holding steady. She wasn't the buzzy name anymore, but she was okay with that. And maybe that's what makes the next chapter so powerful. Because by the late 90s, something began to change in the kinds of scripts that started showing up. They were better, deeper, and more complex. Roles written for women with actual emotional range. And this time, Diane was ready. Maybe more than ready. In 1999, she starred in A Walk on the Moon.
And my mother became the woman she had always wanted to be.
It's a tie-dye.
No one will buy these.
And well, if they see you in one,
Husband's gonna hate it.
he's gonna love you in it. Look how sexy you are.
And suddenly, everything she'd been through, the pressure, the silence, the breakdowns, the rebuilds, it all clicked. She played Pearl Kantrowitz, a 1960s housewife caught between responsibility and desire. The performance was raw, magnetic, and heartbreaking, and critics finally saw what she had been capable of all along. That film marked the beginning of her reinvention. She was no more the child star who got lucky. She became the star who deserves the world and more. She followed it with The Perfect Storm in 2000, which was a blockbuster. She wasn't chasing roles this time. The roles were chasing her. And then came the film that would change everything. But before we get to that, what matters here is that Diane Lane's second act didn't come from luck. She waited for the industry to catch up, and when it finally did, she made damn sure that it would never forget her again. And Diane was just getting started. In 2002, Diane landed the role of Connie Sumner in the movie Unfaithful, directed by Diane Lane. This was the kind of part Diane had waited her whole career for. A deeply flawed, complex woman in a film that didn't shy away from raw, painful truths. She was portraying someone complicated, real, and imperfect, and audiences absolutely loved it. There's one scene in particular from Unfaithful, the train scene, right after Connie first cheats on her husband.
That keeps me from dancing with the one I love.
It's incredibly emotional. Her hands are shaking. She's breathing fast. Not a single word is spoken, but you can literally feel her guilt and fear through the screen. That scene is still considered one of Diane Lane's greatest acting moments. And you want to know the craziest part? It wasn't even in the original script. Director Diane Lane spontaneously told her, "Just shoot something." So Diane closed her eyes, and they captured the entire moment in just one take.
That train scene, we were bringing the train back to the starting point. We were done with our filming day. There was nothing left to film. And it's just me and the crew and Adrian and the camera. And he said, "Well, we might as well roll. What do you got?"
Wow.
Can you believe? Yeah. And I said, you're gonna let me have just one take? I was so,
People actually thought the scene included a sexual act, but not really. Diane laughed about this misunderstanding years later on Late Night with Conan O'Brien.
Headed home, and it's a very erotic scene, and
Well, it's not. That's very funny because sex on the train? There is no sex on the train.
there isn't. No, it's not. No, but you're
not
thinking
erotic.
about it's. No, well, it's well.
Where are we
just,
going?
I don't know. I
Where
just
are
thought
we
it'd be an
going?
amazing Metro North.
The role earned Diane Lane her first ever Oscar nomination for Best Actress. Suddenly, Hollywood was forced to see Diane differently. She'd proven she could carry an entire movie, not just with her looks, but with sheer emotional intensity. A year later, she starred in Under the Tuscan Sun, portraying Frances, a woman rebuilding her life in Italy after divorce. Again, Diane captured something real on screen: pain, loneliness, resilience. She later revealed in interviews how tough filming actually was for her personally, admitting she deeply missed her daughter and felt emotionally overwhelmed at times. But again, her vulnerability translated beautifully to the screen, earning her a Golden Globe nomination and solidifying her reputation as a true actress. This was the turning point. After decades of being underestimated and misunderstood, Diane Lane had finally carved out her own space in Hollywood as a powerful, authentic woman who audiences could relate to. But even as her career rose again, Diane's private life took a complicated turn that led to controversy and scandal. And when she finally opened up about this chapter, it would shock Hollywood all over again. Behind the scenes, Diane was making some major life decisions. In 1984, at just 19 years old, she met actor Christopher Lambert in Paris. Christopher was already huge in Europe, known for roles like Highlander, and there was an instant connection. The two of them married in October 1988, and it looked like Diane might have finally found some peace. They had a daughter, Eleanor Jasmine Lambert, in 1993. Diane later described Eleanor as the guiding light in every life decision I've ever made, showing how deeply motherhood transformed her. But even this seemingly stable relationship struggled under the pressure of Hollywood fame and busy schedules. After 6 years, Diane and Christopher divorced in 1994. But unlike many celebrity splits, theirs wasn't messy. It was quiet, respectful, and surprisingly, drama-free. Diane later said publicly, "Sometimes love just isn't enough," hinting at the quiet sadness behind their separation. After the divorce, Diane Lane once again stepped back, this time taking nearly a decade to let someone new into her life. In 2002, Diane began dating actor Josh Brolin. On paper, they seemed like the perfect Hollywood couple, both talented, respected, and mature enough to handle fame. After a year together, they got engaged and married on August 15, 2004. But just 4 months later, on December 20, 2004, something happened that nobody saw coming. Police responded to a call from Diane and Josh's home in Los Angeles after an intense argument between the couple. Brolin was arrested and charged with misdemeanor domestic battery. Immediately, tabloids blew up with headlines speculating about what really went down that night. But despite all the noise, Diane remained silent. She refused to press charges and made no public statements about the incident. Their spokesperson quickly described the whole situation as a misunderstanding, and just like that, it was swept under the rug. But privately, things weren't that simple. Diane was deeply hurt by what had happened, even if she chose not to share her pain publicly. Friends close to her later hinted that this moment marked a real turning point, causing Diane to withdraw even more from public view. She continued to act in movies, sure, but the walls around her personal life grew higher. The marriage lasted nearly 10 years, which surprised many people considering how it started. They seemed to recover publicly, often appearing at events smiling and affectionate. But behind closed doors, things were complicated. Josh later admitted openly to struggles with alcohol, saying he'd been sober since 2013. While Diane never publicly accused or blamed him, those closest to her could see she was emotionally exhausted. After almost a decade, Diane quietly filed for divorce in February 2013, finalizing it that November. Diane Lane chose once again to handle things quietly, maintaining dignity in the face of heartbreak. She later admitted, "Sometimes stepping away silently is the loudest thing you can do." When everyone thought Diane had left the past behind, she dropped a quiet bombshell, finally addressing a rumor that had followed her through Hollywood like a shadow. And the truth wasn't what anyone expected. In a shocking interview with Esquire magazine, Diane openly confessed that she'd had affairs with both Timothy Hutton and Christopher Atkins, two of her co-stars. The media exploded, revisiting decades-old rumors that had circled her from the very beginning of her career. Her honesty shocked everyone because nobody saw Diane Lane, the actress known for her silence, suddenly telling all. People had speculated for years about her relationships with co-stars. Back in the 80s, she constantly denied romantic involvement, insisting she was just doing her job. But now, years later, Diane decided to set the record straight. She wasn't looking for forgiveness or sympathy. She simply wanted to own her truth and take back some of the control that Hollywood had repeatedly stripped away from her. This simple revelation reframed decades of her public image, showing the world a more complex and human side of the actress they thought they knew. Meanwhile, Diane remained close to Christopher Lambert, the father of her daughter Eleanor, even though their marriage had ended decades earlier. In fact, she frequently mentioned how important their friendship was, especially in co-parenting their daughter. But what surprised people most about Diane Lane was that she didn't just survive her difficult experiences, she used them. She carefully chose roles that reflected her real struggles, portraying complicated, imperfect women. Throughout the late 2000s and early 2010, Diane transformed her public image completely, stepping away from roles that painted her as just a pretty face or romantic interest. She started seeking out characters who represented strength, vulnerability, and authenticity, characters who reflected her own complicated life. It was Diane's way of quietly pushing back against everything Hollywood had expected her to become. In 2010, Diane starred in the film Secretariat, portraying Penny Chenery, a housewife who takes over her father's horse racing empire.
Secretariat even faster! Secretariat refusing to yield, driving forward!
This is unbelievable! No horse can take this pace!
Sham pushes forward to challenge for the rail!
Come on, Ronnie! Come on!
3/4 up blistering 109 and 4! 109 and 4! Secretariat and Sham locked in a deadly duel!
It was a powerful portrayal of a middle-aged woman breaking barriers in a male-dominated world, fighting to prove herself on her own terms. Diane's quiet strength in this role didn't just resonate with audiences, it sent a clear message to Hollywood about what kind of actress she intended to be going forward. Then, in 2015, she took on another powerful supporting role in Trumbo, playing Cleo Fincher, the supportive wife of blacklisted Hollywood screenwriter Dalton Trumbo. This wasn't a flashy, glamorous role either. Instead, Diane portrayed a woman whose strength came from enduring hardship and standing by her family even when the entire world was against them.
Of course, you realize this means war.
Behold.
I had a very unusual mother.
Translation stage mother. The misspent youth of a child acrobat.
Oh, my God. How long were you in show business?
Till I was 15, but it...
By this point, Diane Lane was no longer just an actress. She'd become a symbol for women who quietly endured. She had built her career around the idea that real strength isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet persistence. Her roles spoke for themselves, becoming a silent but powerful rejection of Hollywood's shallow stereotypes. Around this time, Diane reunited with Richard Gere, her co-star from decades earlier, in the 2008 romantic drama Nights in Rodanthe. Fans were excited to see them together again, but what really surprised everyone was how different this movie was from their earlier films. Now both mature adults who had experienced their own personal heartaches, Diane and Richard brought genuine emotion and depth to their roles as two wounded people finding comfort in each other. The chemistry between them felt raw and real, earning praise from critics who saw it as a rare portrayal of mature romance that felt genuinely believable. Yet even with these successes, Diane Lane remained guarded about her private life. Away from the screen, Diane Lane lived quietly. She practiced yoga, spent weekends horseback riding, and focused on raising her daughter, Eleanor, who had grown into a successful model and writer. Diane said repeatedly that Eleanor was her soulmate and her best friend, a bond that seemed even more precious, considering the instability and emotional turbulence Diane experienced in her own childhood. This quiet, stable family life became Diane's anchor, protecting her from the toxic side of fame that had nearly destroyed her as a teenager. As Diane entered her 50s, she openly embraced aging in an industry obsessed with youth. She famously stated in interviews that aging is a privilege, refusing plastic surgery or other treatments to preserve youth artificially. For Diane, each wrinkle represented another year she'd survived, another challenge she'd overcome, and that unapologetic honesty made her even more respected by audiences, particularly women, who saw her as someone authentic, relatable, and genuinely inspiring. In 2018, Diane stepped into the world of television, appearing in the critically acclaimed political drama series House of Cards. It was a bold move for someone traditionally associated with the big screen, but Diane proved again that she wasn't bound by Hollywood expectations. She portrayed a tough, intelligent politician, showcasing a new side of her talent and winning new admiration from audiences who had grown accustomed to seeing her primarily in softer, quieter roles. Then, in 2024, Diane took another risk, starring as legendary New York socialite Slim Keith in the series Feud, Capote vs. the Swans. This portrayal earned her an Emmy nomination, showing Hollywood once again that Diane Lane, even nearing 60, made it clear that she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She continued to reinvent herself, unafraid of complexity or controversy, solidifying her reputation as an actress with depth, talent, and real staying power. Despite all these professional successes, Diane never returned to the flashy spotlight or red carpet drama. Instead, she consistently chose privacy, dignity, and authenticity, qualities rarely celebrated in Hollywood, but deeply admired by her fans. She remained quietly committed to charity work, supporting poverty relief programs through Higher International without ever seeking public praise or recognition. In many ways, Diane Lane quietly proved that Hollywood doesn't have to destroy you, that it's possible to navigate fame without losing yourself. Her strength came from making hard choices, saying no when everyone expected a yes, staying silent when drama seemed unavoidable, and never trading her dignity for fame. That's why, decades after she first appeared on the cover of Time magazine as a teenage star, Diane Lane is still deeply respected, not just as an actress, but as a person. And that's the real story behind Diane Lane. Not just a career, but a quiet rebellion against everything Hollywood tried to make her. If you found this as jaw-dropping as we did, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the stars you thought you knew. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.